Welcome to MacGyver's Workshop, where you never know what we're going to be working on next. If you're not too careful, you just might learn something.
Our next step is going to be putting our pistons in the block. In order to do that, the first thing we want to do is check to make sure that if you took the original rods out and they reused them, that the numbers that are usually stamped onto the sides of the cap here are the right number. That'll indicate what piston number you have, because the machinist will have machined the bore to that piston if he did a good job, which I know for a fact in this case that this guy did. He matched each bore to the piston. So we're good there, and we just want to make sure that the number one rod goes in the number one hole. And the other thing you want to make sure is that, of course, you have the right piston. This one says 30 over, which is what we're looking for. And different makes of engines will have different ways of telling, but on these, I'll come closer so you can see, you've got a little dimple right here, or a little bump on the rod. That's to go to the front of the engine, and you want to make sure that your notch on your piston is the same, pointing to the front of the engine. If not, then your project comes to a screeching halt until you go back to the machinist and say, hey, we got a problem here. So, but I've already checked that before I left the machine shop and compared the stampings on the rods. Most of your manufacturers will have the rod stamped to the cylinder number, so that kind of makes it easy. But if not, then you can get you a little metal stamping kit from, Harbor Freight or whatever, and stamp each one as you're taking them apart. And make sure you stamp them on both the cap and the rod. That way you know which way the cap goes on the rod, just for good measure. The next thing we'll need to worry about is putting our rings on the pistons. And then finally, we'll be putting our bearings in the rods. That'll come later though. First thing we gotta do is we gotta put our rings in. And in this particular motor, our rings come in these little packs and they're all labeled. So this one will say number one top, which will be the top ring that goes in this top land here, number two respectively. And then number three, it's going to have a couple of them labeled 3 oil, and that goes in for the oil ring down here at the bottom, which usually has 3 pieces to it. You have one wide separator, and then you have 2 little thin scraper rings. So what I like to do is start from the bottom and work my way up to the top. So I'm going to turn around over here and do this on my surface where I have nice soft towel. I can lay my piston down there and not worry about galling anything up. And the other thing you want to watch for too on these is some of these rings go on the piston a certain way. So some of them will have to be a certain side up. So you want to look to see if they have like a dimple or a bevel or anything like that on the ring, to know which side goes up, if it's particular that way. Not all of them are. And then the other thing we're going to do is, just for extra good measure, we're going to measure our piston ring end gap. And I'm about to move the camera around a little bit to show you that. But Piston ring end gap is important because if it's too loose or too wide, it's too big of a gap, you're going to lose compression and power. And if it's too tight, as the engine warms up and everything expands, they could butt together and seize the piston in the bore, and that's not going to end well. So let me move stuff around here where we can get a better look at this and show you how we're going to check this. Okay, now the way you want to check your piston ring end gap is you want to stick your ring down in the bore here, and then you want to kind of straighten it up with the piston by pushing your piston in there upside down, and that'll make sure that the ring is not, you know, cocked this way or that way, which may affect the ring end gap. Now, I've double checked this top ring and it doesn't care which way it goes in, up or down. So what we will do is we will pop this puppy in here, and then we'll line it up with our piston like so. And you want to do it about, you know, mid-bore, because you want to make sure you've got your piston in there straight. And then what we're going to do is we're going to measure that gap right there. And I'm going to switch over to my other camera here so we can get a better view on that. So with our ring centered in the bore, that is what our gap looks like. Now I'm going to measure that with a feeler gauge. These rings are dead on with 18 thousandths, and the spec is 14 to 26. The machinist recommended 18, but just because they come fresh out of the package, you always want to check them. So we're going to check each ring, make sure everything's good as we're putting it together. Now that I've checked all my ring end gaps, I'm going to leave these guys here with their respective cylinders, and I'll put them back on the piston. But since we're going from the bottom up, we're going to start putting our oil rings on first. And how you do that is you put your little waffle looking separator in first. Okay, and we'll just lay that round on the piston like so. And then the two little fine rings, little thin rings, they're the scrapers as they call them. They'll go on the top and the bottom of that little separator as they call it. And you want to be kind of gentle with this. So you just want to kind of roll these on. And you want to be careful not to scratch or score anything up. And you want to make sure that the two ends of your separator are not overlapped. And then what I like to do is I'll space the gaps at 90 degrees from each other. So I've got my bottom scraper here, then my other one's actually 180 degrees. I'll do it over here on this side. And you just roll them on there nice and gentle and easy. And there you go. Now we'll start with our second and first compression ring. One thing you want to check for is on your compression rings is you want to check to see if there's either a bevel or any kind of particular marking on the piston ring, and then check with the manufacturer's website to see which end or which way goes up, because these are Hastings Molle rings, and they have an inside bevel on one side of the ring, and then they also have a dot on the other side of the ring. So I went to their website and double checked, and the bevel side always goes up. Now, as I said, the top ring has no markings and no bevel, so it can go either way. But the second one is important because that bevel needs to be towards facing the top of the piston. So you always want to pay attention to those kind of details like that. So now let's put all our rings and pistons together and get ready to start dropping them in the hull. Now when you're talking about your compression rings, we want to roll those guys on the same way. You don't want to, obviously you don't want to break the ring, but you don't want to gall your compression or gall your piston up either, or scratch it up. So just very gently roll the ring on around the perimeter of the piston. You got to get past that first ring land, and there she goes. Now we're not going to worry too much about the clocking on it just yet until we get our top ring in, and then as we go to drop it in, then we'll clock the gaps opposite on the compression ring. Now we'll get these guys all ringed up and get ready and drop them in the hole. So we're ready to start stabbing some pistons here. Now what I'm going to do is I've got some of my break-in oil that I'm using here. It's just straight 30 weight for this particular motor. And I'm going to dab some in the container here. Now I'll use assembly lube on the bearings, but when I go to put my pistons in here, as far as lubricating the rings and the pistons and the bore, we're just going to use the regular motor oil. Now, so we're going to start with cylinder 1. I'm going to put the crankshaft with the throw all the way down at the bottom of its stroke. That way, that along with having some protection on the rod bolts here, we'll make sure we don't want to injure our crankshaft by hitting it with one of these rod bolts. Just some, rubber hose slides over there. Good enough for that. All these bearings are the same. You just want to make sure that your hole lines up with your hole in the rod here. And then like I said, we will dab some assembly lube on that. And of course, making sure that our dimple and our notch on our piston is facing the front of the motor, which is this way on this particular setup here. All right. Then we're going to take our hands and lube this bore up generously. Okay. And then we'll lubricate our piston generously. And we drop her down in the hole. And we get ready with our piston ring compressor. No better investment than a good piston ring compressor. Now, if you can afford the individual ones that go, based on piston size, which means you have an individual ring for 4-inch bore, 10-inch over, or 10 thousandths oversized, 30 thousandths oversized, whatever, you know, that's great. But most home shops, they're just gonna have an adjustable one like this. Like this one here is one I got from Lyle, and just make sure it seats flush to the top of the block, and crank it down there so it compresses the rings real good. And I've already clocked my rings opposite each other, the ring gaps. And then all you gotta do is just tap that puppy down in there, and you will be good to go. Yeah, just easy peasy. She went down in there. Should never be any more difficult than that. If it fights you, then that means you've got something wrong. You need to take your ring compressor back off and double check everything. And then I don't like driving them all the way home unless I've got somebody down on the bottom side making sure I can catch everything. But if I'm doing it by myself here, then I'll get it in there, get my ring compressor off, and then I'll push it down ever so gently and make sure that I've got everything lined up just so. There we go. You don't want to go hammering anything anywhere. You just want to make sure you got everything nice and smooth. Everything goes together nice and smooth. Because if it don't go easy, something ain't right. Now we've installed our rod cap. Made sure it's on the correct way. We'll gently bring these rod bolts up. And the torque spec on these for this motor is 40 to 45 foot-pounds. All right, 1 down, 5 to go. Piston number 6 going in the hole. No leftover bearings, that's a good sign. Just kidding. All right, she's in there. So we've got all our pistons in, and the rods are torqued to spec, our mains are torqued to spec. Now the next thing we've got to do is we've got to put our camshaft in and our timing gears on the front, and then essentially our short block will be complete. Alright, now we're going to press our timing gear off the old camshaft, and we don't really care much about this because we're replacing the cam, we're replacing the gears. The only thing we need is this little thrust plate that's behind here. So we're going to use our hydraulic press and take it off. But when we go to put our new stuff together on our new cam, we'll take our gear and we will bake it in a 400-degree oven for a while, let it expand and keep the camshaft cool. And then that way when we go to press the gear, the new gear onto the new cam, it's not going to be such a traumatic experience. So, safety first, and Let's see how we do here. Pressing this thing off. Hopefully we won't shatter the gear, which we won't. It's pressing on out of there right nicely. There we go. That wasn't too terrible. But this is what we are after, and I'm grateful that the thrust plate appears to be in good shape. It's not overly worn, and we're going to keep everything oriented the way it's supposed to be. And we'll need to take our key off of here and this little ring, and we'll be ready to go on the new cam. And now we're going to pop our little keyway off of this shaft, this old camshaft, and we can get this little spacer ring here. Now, since we are going to be tapping with a punch, I'm a little paranoid now about getting crap in my eye. Safety glasses here, and we will work that key out of there, and there it is. And once that's out, and we can get our ring off of there, and we'll clean those up, and they'll get ready to go on the new camshaft. And once we bake our new timing gear to let it expand a little bit, and we'll put all this together on the new camshaft, and we'll be ready to stab it in the motor. So now, one more little thing I can mention, this little spacer ring that goes on the camshaft, if you happen to not be paying attention and lose which way it went, there's a bevel on the inside of this ring, and that bevel goes towards the camshaft, and the flat side goes towards the gear. So hopefully that'll save somebody some grief later on down the road. Now, this is the new camshaft, or bump stick as we affectionately like to call it. Now, this is a special camshaft because it is what you would consider to be a performance or high performance cam. Now, we're not talking something that, you know, we're going to take down to the local Cars and Coffee and enter a cackle fest or anything like that. This is not that kind of cam. But this cam is significantly higher performance than stock, meaning that it has a higher lift, a little bit more duration, and however, its benefit is designed for lower RPM and torque. Now, this cam is made by Urson. It's Urson Cams. That company's been around since the beginning of racing, pretty much. And this is their RV10H cam. And I'll post all the specs. I'll scan the cam card and post it up as a still here in the video so you can see. And I'll do it as a comparison against a regular stock 306 camshaft. And the subtle differences there, coupled with the better breathing that we've accomplished with by porting the head and improving the exhaust, improving the intake, improving the carburation, we hope to really bump up the power level. Power Nation, I think they got like, what was it, almost like a 70 some odd horsepower gain just by putting a 4-barrel intake and a header on. So, you know, we're doing that plus a camshaft. So we should be, you know, significantly in the pocket for some serious power gains. And these are going to be power gains that are usable down low where this truck's going to be driven all the time, which is idle to maybe 4,000 RPM, 4,500 tops. So, but we did put better valve springs in there. So if by some freak of nature she does wind it out, she won't float the valves. So you never know. You just, you know, doesn't hurt to be safe than sorry. So now all we need to do is put our thrust plate on there, and then our cam gear, once it's done baking in the aforementioned 400-degree oven. God bless my wife. She's so patient and tolerant with me. I think back when we were rebuilding the tractor, we put our own pistons on the rods. So I was baking the pistons in the oven, heating them up, and heating the rod ends up to you know, put the pistons on the rods and everything. And yeah. Anyway, God bless her. She's the best. All right, so let's get a move on here. All right, so after reading the instructions that came with the new timing gear set, they suggest warming it up in some oil. So what we'll do is we'll stick it on a skillet here, and we'll just put it in, so use some vegetable oil so I don't have any sacrificial skillets laying around, but we'll warm it up that way. And that'll expand it enough to where it'll press on nice and easy on the new camshaft out there. Take us some vegetable oil here, just enough to barely submerge it. This cheap old vegetable oil. And then we'll fire that puppy up. And what that'll do is that'll expand it and make it a little bit bigger so that it'll slide onto that shaft a lot easier. And I've got the camshaft and everything set up and ready to go out there. So as soon as we're done with this, we can just take that gear out of there and put it in a towel and run it out to the shop and press that puppy on there. All right, so I'm gonna take one more check with nifty little thermopen, instant read thermometer here. And it's been simmering. It's about probably about 350 degrees, which is good. So it ought to be expanded up really good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this gear out of the pan here and kind of lightly drain it, put it on my towel, and then we're going to make a beeline to the workshop and get it on the press. See, we cross over with the La Rachetta show all the time. You know, this is going to be like Southern fried cam gear. Make sure you let it rest, otherwise it won't be juicy. Okay. And we'll take our 350 degree cam gear and take it on out, and I'm going to move this pan back to the back of the stove here, and I'm going to let my lovely wife know that that pan is hot and not touch it. And off we go. Alrighty, we are here with our Southern Fried cam gear. I know I made a joke about it letting it rest, but we actually don't want to let it rest because we don't want it to cool down. There we go. There we go. That'll do. We shouldn't have to hardly do nothing at all. Press this down on here. See, these gears are machined to like an extreme tolerance. And if you go wailing on these things with a hammer, or if you ding those gears up, then they'll be noisy when you put them in the truck. All right, we're in there. It's like I said when we were putting the pistons in, it should go together nice and smooth. If it gives you any fuss, you done something wrong. So now we can just let that set and cool, and we'll be ready to install our camshaft in the motor. Now we stab in our bump stick. And what I've got is I've got a long bolt here on the outside of the cam threaded in to help me, give me some extra leverage. And then as we go in, we'll generously apply our assembly lube and go right on in with our camshaft. It's a good thing about assembly lube is that it's real thick and it sticks real good to whatever you're putting in here. And just very gently get ourselves going here. Once you get a couple of them in, it'll sit on its own there, and it'll make this a little bit easier. You go in one bearing at a time. That's how I always learned it. Because you don't want to, I mean, you could goob the whole shaft up and then shove it in, but this just seems to make more sense to me. And you were gonna dollop a good bit of lube on the bottom of those lifters before we drop them in too, so we'll be good to go there. Okay. Just a little bit more to go. You know, a lot of the problems folks are having with these flat tappet camshafts, not that I'm a huge fan of stuff that gets imported in from overseas that ends up being, you know, like half the price or less than what you could buy from like Seal Power or something like that. But the problem is nowadays motor oil doesn't have the zinc in it like it used to, and what happens is the cam doesn't get broken in properly, and the lobes just wear down, and the lifters, you know, that they don't establish that it'll kind of get lapped in, so to speak, and you know, that's where you end up with a lot of problems with you know, cam wear and lifters, you know, going south on you, and you know, that's why it's real important. A lot of these manufacturers, these cam grinders now, Comp Cams, Urson, all these guys, they're saying, you know, you've got to use this just straight 30 oil to break the motor in, and then you know, and add that zinc additive and run it, you know, high idle, 1800 RPM, maybe 2000, you know, for 30-45 minutes, and you know, and then take it out and stop the engine, drain the oil out, and then you know, run it again, and then you're good to go. But if you don't follow that procedure, then it's not going to work. So anyway, let's get this all finished up here. All right. Now we got our camshaft in there, our cam gear and all that. I haven't bolted down the thrust plate yet, but we're getting to that. But I wanted to line my crank gear up. Now the crank gear, you know, we can, you know, tap that down on the snout of the crankshaft, you know, without worrying about messing anything up. The only thing you got to be real careful about with these timing gears is they're machined with such precision, and they're, you know, matched together. If you were to drop one of these and ding one of the teeth or something, then you know, it's going to make noise when the engine's running. So, you know, we were real careful, examined both leading and trailing edges of both gears to make sure there was no damage before I got it. The box they come in was good, and we were real careful, you know, going together with it. And now we just got to tap this gear on the rest of the way, and you know, that's really it for the short block. And the next episode we will you know, make it a long block. You know, we'll get the oil pump in there, the pickup tube, the oil pan, you know, rear main seal, front timing cover, you know, all that kind of good stuff. And you know, get the head on it, and we'll kind of get our, you know, roller rocker set up, make sure we're all good there. Really not much point in degreeing the cam other than doing it just to know where everything is. The cam itself is supposedly already 4 degrees advanced straight up with the timing marks. But we'll see how that goes. And we'll be experimenting with the different screw-in studs to see which ones we need to where we can keep our stock push rods, which would be excellent. And that's not only a lot less hassle, but again, a little cost savings too. So let me get this gear tapped on here. This is not one that we had to worry about, you know, heating up or anything like that. You know, we can press this gear on and you know, with the crank bolt and get it on there. Just this one you got to be real careful with. And there's Maddie, magnificent MacGyver's Workshop dog. Alrighty. We got our timing gears in there all good. That's what we want to see. Well, all right. So that's pretty much how we put our short block together. And stay tuned for the next episode where we get a little bit further along with it. Of course, got work tomorrow, so can't burn the midnight oil on this one. But appreciate everybody watching. And I know a lot of my subscribers have been looking forward to this part of the project. Even more so, none more than myself, but even more so when we actually fire it up. And then I get to do my best Gene Wilder, you know, it's alive! But anyway, again, I appreciate everybody watching. If you're new to the channel here, please subscribe if you like what you see. Feel free to comment. I'm not the world's foremost expert on everything, so I'm always open to suggestions, and if somebody has a better way of doing it, I'm all ears, trust me. So we will look forward to seeing y'all on the next episode where we get to the long block. And you can also, if you don't care to comment online, you can also email me at MacGyversWorkshop@gmail.com. And now, check out our webpage, www.MacGyversWorkshop.net. I couldn't get .com. There's apparently a fella out there who builds pretty tough. I give him that. He does you know, real high-end kind of model building, and he's got MacGyversWorkshop.com. So hey, check him out if you're into model building. It's I got hung up looking at it. It's pretty interesting. So, but you can check out our little web page, or there's a little Google web page, and www.MacGyversWorkshop.net. See you next time.